This session on choosing curriculum will be led by Mrs. Kate Thoelke, who serves as principal of Our Savior Lutheran School in Houston, Texas. Please welcome Mrs. Thoelke.
Thank you so much for coming. I've been at this for a while. I'll just give you a tiny bit of background about me. So, let's see. Okay, so as I've been at Our Savior for about I finished my third year this year. So I'm entering my fourth year as full-time principal for them. Prior to that, I served at St. Paul Hamel. I had been called in 2015 as their teacher and music director, and then they called me as principal. Prior to that, I homeschooled our girls. And you can see we have 3 daughters who are now in, I've got one who is at Irvine studying to be a director of parish music. Emily is also at Irvine studying to be a classical Lutheran teacher, so I'm working them, trying to get them out there in the world. And then Annie is at A&M, so apparently I'm raising one of them right, is what I understand. So we homeschooled the girls until we were able, and God brought us to St. Paul Hamel so that they could be at a classical Lutheran school. But we homeschooled classically. I had taught in Lutheran schools in Chicago and Fort Wayne, and then also in St. Charles County in Missouri. And after teaching in Fort Wayne, there was this school that had opened, and that was happening while I was teaching at this brand new school, Ascension, if you know it. This little school called Zion Academy had started doing classical education, and it was this foreign thing, like what are they doing over there? But it took until homeschooling for me to discover what a great treasure trove we have in classical education, and to be trained in that, and then to find my way here. So that is where we're at today. So today we're going to talk about how to go about choosing curriculum. And it does feel sometimes very overwhelming, but what I'd like to do is give you a foundation in order to go forward and make some decisions either for your school or homeschool. I would think you should be able to apply this across the board. So we're going to talk about what are your school's mission and goals. And I was just in the accreditation session with Dr. Eve, and she was talking about how CCLE, when she comes to your school or homeschool to do an accreditation, she's looking at your school specifically because your context, your history really matters. And so while applying classical education where you're at matters, because let me tell you, it is quite different going from homeschool to a small country school in Hamel, Illinois, of a village of 800 people, to one of the largest cities in our nation, in Houston. And we don't have 1,500 students, but we're close to 350 at Our Savior, and just a preschool through 8th grade. We're also going to talk about the needs of your scholars, because you will need to consider what it is your scholars need going in. Now, most importantly, we know that our scholars need to learn how to dive well, right? Ultimately, that's what we're working on. As we do that, there are some specific needs that these children have, and we'll discuss some of those challenges our teachers will face in the classroom or you in your home. And I'll give you some resources. I'll tell you some of the tricks that I have found to help afford classical education. Okay, so what is it that you want to teach? So, of course, the school's mission and goals should guide your selection of the curriculum. And a school that emphasizes academic excellence will need a curriculum that is challenging and rigorous. When families hear that you have a classical school, they're going to expect some level of rigor. They're coming probably from a state school, and they expect what they're going to get is going to be better. And I love Mrs. Benson, you know, that she came to St. Paul and talked about how good enough is never good enough. And so when we're looking at curriculum, good enough can never be good enough. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and this was drilled into me when I became a principal, is that when I'm talking curriculum, when I use that term, and something I never grasped, sadly, until I became a principal, is that curriculum is not about the books. The books are not your curriculum. Curriculum is what you teach. What are you going to tell your students, and what are the treasures that you're going to give them? That is curriculum. So today we're going to talk about how you decide that and what resources you can use to benefit and to support that curriculum. Also, our schools focus on character development, and we need a curriculum that focuses on ethics and morality. Most importantly, as Lutherans, we are concerned with what we believe, teach, and confess. You and your teachers need to know what we as Lutherans believe, teach, and confess. And I'm just going to put another plug out there. Get your teachers certified. It will do a great deal of good for your school because it raises their understanding when they have to articulate it well and articulate their faith. So get them certified. All right. So Pastor Paul, my buddy, in his first talk, I'm going to check some boxes today. He talked about checking the boxes of Luther, right? Well, we're going to go ahead and check some boxes, though. And frankly, the foundation of everything that when I approach looking at what I want to do in a school, I want to have the masters guiding me, and I would consider Martin Luther and Melanchthon with their Latin school is a fantastic example because I want to teach Lutheran. So just in the same way when I'm writing a PhD paper, I want to see what they're looking for so that I can model it. I want to model after the Latin school, of course, in this modern age. And so we're going to check the box of Dr. Korchak as well. So he wrote Lutheran Education from Wittenberg to the Future. I highly recommend it if you have not read it, and he will go deeper into that. So let's talk about how Luther set up his day and his week. His weekly schedule had 4 full academic days. Wednesday and Saturday or half day, they worked on catechesis. All lessons were rooted deeply. Every discipline was rooted deeply in religious instruction, and all their daily hobby work was rooted in their religious instruction. Their languages were Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. I threw Spanish in there, and this is a question that you will have to grapple with. Being in a city like Houston, I get this question a lot as a principal. Parents ask why we don't teach Spanish, and you know, we are up to 8th grade. We want to give them the foundations of Latin grammar, and so we do not push Spanish, but you may have that question whether or not that should be in your, as part of your curriculum. Does anyone in here have Spanish that you offer in your school? What? Okay. Of course. That's right. All right, so, in Latin, Luther encouraged and taught a modern approach to Latin. The grammarians of the time focused on correct pronunciation, but his approach to the liberal arts was much more focused on imparting theology and the liturgical life of the church. Melanchthon and other evangelicals focused on humanistic canons and a more classical approach. All right, and so he, of course, had Greek and Hebrew in literature. So They were also, the evangelicals of the time were focusing their literature choices on ancient works because they saw that they supported the training of wisdom, they contained eloquence and reinforced scripture. Literature supports training of the skills and crafts. They were introducing young Christians to Aesop's Fables. So I highly recommend you put Aesop's Fables on your list. Progressing to works of Terence and Plautus, then Virgil, Ovid, and finally Cicero. And Lutherans at that time, they were not wanting to shy away from modern works. If you read through the Saxon Visitations, they were looking at things like Erasmus's Colloquies and Muscellinus's Pedagogia. So, in this regard, I like to go ahead and I don't see a problem with looking at modern literature and considering good modern literature. Pastor Colin gave us some great examples of modern literature that can continue to help deliver understanding about what we believe teaching is best and create that dialectic conversation that we need to have with our scholars. In history, Luther viewed history as the portrayal of God's dealings with man and how he dealt with us according to his grace and anger. Melanchthon wanted curriculum for the youth for history, antiquity, and judgments of the past. He wanted it to be comprehensive, but he wanted it to be short. At OSL, our answer is that we use Antiquas Centuum, is what we call it. It's 100 events that we have chosen. We put Christ at the center, 50 important events that, this is not my choosing, this is before I got there. They have 50 events that they chose that they wanted to highlight prior to Christ, and 50 events after. Now the challenge with that, of course, is that there are other events that happen, right? After you've chosen those 50. We've had several things occur. It doesn't mean that you can't continue to talk about those things that are happening in modern day as part of your curriculum, but those are the ones that OSL has chosen that this is what they're going to teach and what they're going to focus on.
What's it called again?
We call it Antiquas Centuum. Yeah? I mean, see, as a teacher in modern age, and we don't speak Latin, it's okay, right? I'm not going to be so concerned with exact pronunciation. All right, the other thing, moving on, let me show you here. So, looking at music instruction, which I know today, in this week, we talk a lot about music. But Martin Luther saw music as one of the greatest arts. It's a wonderful way to deliver theology to your students. He saw it in two ways: musica practica, which is the tools of composition and performance, and musica theorica, which is the quadrivium, so the speculative and mathematical aspects of music. He saw music as a semi-disciplinarian and schoolmaster because music cultivates gentleness, tenderheartedness, modesty, and discretion. Of course, these are all wonderful things we would like to deliver to our young scholars. Also, he said that it makes for a more fine and skilled people. In the grammatical instruction, he gave the basic rules of music. Choir was at the center of these children's lives. They focused on hymns and liturgy. So when you're choosing curriculum, we sit down and we look at what hymns do we want these children to learn. We go through the hymnal. We make sure that they are done in and outside of the classroom. They learn it in their music class. We sing it in chapel to make it become part of that it becomes written on their hearts. I really appreciated today's conversation and the presentation by Pastor Price. The day always begins and ends with singing. At our Savior, we start with prayer, corporate prayer together, and we sing together, and we always end the day. We have a hymn of the week, so we're singing that. We sing it in chapel, of course. and they should be singing throughout the day. Children participated in the daily offices of the church. Now what that means is they were actually leading. They were leading matins and vespers, they led in Sunday morning mass, and they also sang for funerals and weddings. Martin Luther talked about how it was very important that the children were not just just free labor, that they also were artists and must be compensated. And so that was divided among the schoolmaster and the children. So I think that's interesting for us to consider when we are thinking about putting our children out there on Sunday morning and having them sing, that it's not just a volunteer position, but of course it should be well done. So you have to deal with that as well. Okay, so philosophy and the sciences. So this is a tough one because when you want to base this in the Latin school, it's much tougher because at that time, as you know, there was a suspicion of science held by the church, which contributed to the absence of science in the classrooms at that point. But gathering knowledge from the natural world still supports the understanding of God's creation and a fuller understanding of the truth. So definitely teach the sciences. Definitely don't shy away from those. And of course, philosophy. The knowledge of the modern sciences and the historic Concordia knowledge is gained through research and the understanding of this knowledge as a manifestation to the greater truth. Ensuring our scholars are well read and have a basic command of the trivial arts of grammar, logic, and rhetoric provide the eloquence of expressing it well to the world in the worldview of Christianity. So, Melanchthon, I wanted to make a point about him promoting teaching anatomy because he saw this as a way to teach the beauty of God's creation and applying grammar, logic, and rhetoric to fully incorporate the modern study of philosophy and sciences. Now, in grammar school, giving them an understanding of the disciplines of science is important. They need to understand and they need to be given an awe of God's creation at this point. We want them to learn and memorize the scientific method, understand how to employ that whenever they want to go through a process of learning about that discipline. I encourage one memorizing the scientific method and then doing an experiment every single week that corresponds with whatever lesson you're teaching about that week. We also, being top-down as a classical school looking at science, we're talking about, we look at what we're going to teach in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, what we want them to know before they leave our classrooms. We find all the grammar that's necessary. We front-load that starting already in preschool. And so they're already memorizing grammar pieces from science that they're going to learn in 6th and then 8th grade. If they already have that understanding, the teacher, when they get up to teach, they can say, remember, when you memorized this, they can recite it for you, sing it for you, then they can teach you about it and you can move them into that dialectic stage. Do I need to say that again? I see some question marks about that. Yes, sir?
Give an example.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so memorizing constellations, right? Children can memorize the names of constellations. You can show them the pictures or kinds of stars. Let's just even go there. They can memorize types of stars. There are 5 kinds of stars, and then they can, these are 5 kinds of stars, and then they might sing a little song about 5 kinds of stars. They can do that in kindergarten, but they're not going to get astronomy deeply until they get into 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. They'll probably have some, depending on where you're at, see it somewhere in 3, 4, 5, in that middle grade, right? You can give them a little deeper understanding at that point, but they've already memorized it, they know those words. So, I think I could probably have a whole nother session about how to coach your teachers on classical model, but that's not what this is about. So I don't want to get too far into it, but does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Here's the other thing about science, and I'm going to bring history into this as well. History and science are both content areas, and when we're talking about grammar school, we are in the lower grades, we're teaching them the foundation of reading, right? You have to get that right. Number one, because what is the most important thing that we want our children to know? The word. Okay? To understand the word, you have to know how to read it or hear it and understand what those words mean. We're giving them the building blocks of Jesus when we teach them how to read in those early years. So your curriculum is going to be focusing really heavily on how to teach these children to read so that they can take that tool when they get to third, fourth, and fifth, those middle grades, and their brains are ready to apply that. You've probably heard you're teaching them how to read until second grade, and then you're now reading to learn starting in third grade. You may have heard that. But there's some really solid reasons for that. When you look at history and science being content areas, in the early years, read it to them. They're not ready yet to read about that content. Read it to them. Give them that experience. Get them out into nature. Have them draw about it. Have them practice writing about it. When they get to third, fourth, and fifth grade, that's when they start reading it. You're going to apply grammar, logic, and rhetoric in using history and science as a tool to reinforce that. So they're going to get practice reading using content subject areas, and forgive me, disciplines. I don't really like to use subjects when it comes to classical education because everything works together, as you know, right? But use it as a tool for them to practice what they need to know, and then they're going to be able to use those things. They'll already have that experience before they're even ready for it. And then when they get into that 6, 7, and 8, 9 through 12, when they dig even deeper, they've seen it, they have exposure to it. All right, let's talk about the needs of our scholars and the challenges of modern education. Now, if you were in here this last session, Reverend Pauling gave us a great case for being very cautious about AI, right? So we've got this huge piece that we're now having to handle in education. Learner engagement. How do we make sure that the children stay with us? Now, granted, I will be the first one to argue that classical education, we've got this down because we teach with the brain. So the ancients figured it out long, long time ago. So if you're not an effective teacher, you're probably not a classical teacher. And if you are an effective teacher, you're probably a classical teacher. And I often, when I have to bring new teachers on who have never taught classical, if they were effective, typically I find that they teach classically. It's just the reality of it. Of course, the technology usage, this is also a challenge we have to grapple with. Are we going to use real textbooks? I'm going to recommend have a real book in hand. There are times, though, when it may be cheaper, and sometimes that we have to handle that in a large school. Mental health. Pastor Pauling brought up the anxious generation. This is pretty scary, and I'm concerned for these children. We've just gone through a really horrible time in education with COVID, and it has impacted them mentally. We are really working to, thanks be to God, we have the richest theology to give them in the midst of trying to handle all of these things. And of course, educational inequity. Generally, our neighbors in the public school and the government schools are really dealing with that. But we are challenged with the fact that in Lutheran schools, we don't have a whole lot of money often because we can't charge so much tuition. We want it for everybody. And then we have these learning difficulties. Okay? So, this is a problem. At least 1 in 59 children, or 14% of the population, actually has a learning disability. Dyslexia is the highest. There's actually 1 in 5 children have dyslexia. That's the most recent issue that the statistic I've heard. Now, this can be very challenging for a school because oftentimes a family, when I first got to OSL, I called all the families that were members but didn't put their children in our school. So I wanted to find out why. Why aren't you coming? We've got this beautiful education. Why are you sending them to a government school? The number one reason, my children have a learning disability and you can't handle it. Folks, we got a problem with that because those children should not be relegated away and not receive the good gifts of God. The treasures that we have in our classical Lutheran schools, Cheryl Swope has done a great job. We're going to talk a little bit about what she has done for us to be able to give us a resource so that we can support these children. Now keep in mind, dyslexia, dyscalculia, these things will impede on whether or not they can read. And what did we say before was the number one thing we've got to get for these children? What do we have to give them? Read. Yeah. We want them to be able to read the word, inwardly digest it, share it with their neighbor, and yet they can't read it. Now, there are some challenges. I've got some other stats here. Let's see. But I think I'm not going to belabor that. Okay, so we talked about, I mentioned Cheryl Swope. So this is one resource when you have these learning challenges. She's written this beautiful book, Simply Classical. I highly recommend you have every teacher in your school read that book. This is extremely helpful also when you're talking with families who aren't sure that your school is going to be able to handle the needs. As a classical Lutheran school, Lutheran schools, which I would venture to say, if you're truly Lutheran, you are classical. And if you're classical, truly classical, you're Lutheran. Okay? That might be a bold statement, but that's where I'm coming from. That's what I believe. Martin Luther had a school for boys, and he had a school for girls. Lutheran education is for all. Now, I'm only differentiating the sexes there, but I'm saying that our children, we don't relegate them. Now, granted, there are children with greater disabilities than we have the chance to handle, but we have resources for children with dyslexia. We have resources for children with dyscalculia, and they're out there, and they can be utilized. So, Memorial Press has printed the Simply Classical, a beautiful educational detailed curriculum, textbook, tools for your curriculum to enhance it and to support those that are challenged with that, with those learning challenges. And it can go hand in hand with what you're doing with the other children. So that's one resource that I highly recommend when we're trying to answer that question. Okay. Now, looking at how to choose what you're going to use, what tools you want to bring into your classroom and into your school. We think about affordability, And who is your faculty? Right? Maybe it's you. Maybe you're the teacher in the classroom, but I don't know where to begin. Right? Or you've got faculty that you've brought on who has, who they've taught in other Lutheran schools, but not classical, brand new teachers. Again, I did a coaching and mentoring session last year. If you want to talk about that, we can do that. Give me a call. But our resources can be very limited because of the affordability that we have. Most importantly, though, is your faculty. So developing them, sending them to CCLE, getting them trained, you training them is extremely important to that process. Because, as I said before, these are tools that you can give them to deliver your curriculum. And who is it that does that? It's your teachers. And you need to support them every which way you can to make sure that they know how to do that. Okay, so I'm going to give you some ways to afford it. Memorial Press, who published Simply Classical, here's the problem. Not a problem. Here's the challenge. Memorial Press is not Lutheran, but it's classical. I like using this for our teachers. One, because they're new to it often, and Memorial Press does a fantastic job of laying out grammar, logic, and rhetoric. They do a really good job with that. And I like to immerse our teachers in that because I can't just expect them to go forth and deliver the best classical education you can. This is a tool that they can follow. So what I'm showing you here is that they have a standard or partnership. You can become a standard member or partner member, and they give you some benefits. First of all, they'll give you a 30% off their registration to their teacher training, which is in Kentucky. And they'll also give you, if you join as a partner, they'll put you on their website so people can find you, which is nice. That's a really great tool. If people are looking for a classical school in the area, they may go there, even if they're not Lutheran. But hey, we're in the business of making Lutherans, right? So bring them on. So standard member benefits, you get 10% off your purchases from Memorial Press, and they give you free shipping every time. And also, they'll come to you and help train your teachers. And you can send 3 teachers for free for their teacher training. Now, granted, I always have to preface that for the teachers. I prepare them. You're going to hear some things because that are not Lutheran. But I also expect that my teachers know what it means to be Lutheran, right? We have faculty readings. We've read through Long Gospel. We have a wonderful pastor who helps support us in that. We went through God at Work this year to help them learn how to teach about vocation to our students, which, by the way, is on accreditation as well. And, but anyway, that's a way to afford Memorial Press. I'm not saying Memorial Press is the only thing out there. There are lots of other tools. Veritas Press is another one. Again, not Lutheran. So you always have to be sure that it lines up with what we believe teaching them best. And what's most important is understanding that this is not your curriculum. Right? If you remember that this is not your curriculum, this is a tool for your teachers to deliver the great treasures of Lutheranism and the world around us and what God has given to us. You can get yourself through that. But these are, I would say, probably the 3 big ones at the top are kind of what the classical Christian schools across the nation, they are using. Wittenberg Academy, we have the assistant headmaster, and she's been working on getting everything printed up so that we actually have a Lutheran curriculum tool that can support you in your school. So see Holly James, and she can tell you about all of the things that they're coming up with, which is a super great tool as a classical Lutheran school. Okay. Okay, let me tell you about choices that we made at Our Savior. I'll even talk to you a little bit about some of the choices made at St. Paul, because it does change, right, from context, history, the place you're living in right now, the difference between, and also I'll talk to you a little bit about the homeschooling, if that'll help you. Is there anyone out here who is homeschooling? Okay, so if I talk a little bit about that, that would be helpful? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so choices that we've made in our schools, and the schools that I've been blessed to serve. First of all, religion. I love this. This is so fantastic. I just love this. So, the Story Bible. CPH's The Story Bible has beautiful artwork. And they've done a beautiful job. I don't know that anyone classical is actually putting it together, but it starts off with some grammar, some words they don't know. Does that sound familiar? And then, so it gets them ready for the lesson. Then you read the story to them, right? Then it's got some great little questions. And then there's some extension to the lesson as you teach that to them. It's a great way to deliver the grammar of religion. In the early years, we need them to have the grammar of the Bible. These are the stories. People have been doing it for a long time. Sunday school is all about that, right? We want to teach the Bible stories. So this is what I love about this, is that Memorial Press picked up on that. And they use it now at their schools, at Highlands Latin School, and so they're getting Lutheran over there in the earliest stages, which, could that not be the best place to put it, is to get some Lutheran right in there? So that was really great. We have used Concordia, Catechetical Academy in those middle grades and the upper grades. We have used Concordia's Bible history book. That's a great tool that we've utilized. And then in 6th and 8th grade, we've been using the Martinez Luther, the Latin Small Catechism. So after we start teaching in 2nd grade, and we adopted Memorial Press's Latin starting in 2nd grade. We do song school Latin that we give to the teachers in the lower end so that they can start singing some of the Latin. We have them talk and say, Salve, Magistra, and so forth. So we get them into that practice of actually using the Latin in the classroom. They think it's cute. But since we have the entire Latin series going all the way up, by that point, they're already doing ELOCs in 6th and 8th grade, and so they can read through the small catechism in 7th and 8th grade in Latin. So that's some of those things. In literature, again, Memorial Press has been where I've gone to, because I really appreciate for our teachers, especially those that they are still working on really grasping. I want them to be confident in classical education and how to deliver that material. And Memorial Press is a great tool for that, because it starts with the grammar. It helps build that the vocabulary for them, gets them reading beautiful books. And many of them are favorites of mine, because it's all about me. But no, I mean, those books are like old friends. And so if it is an old friend, it's probably good for your students as well. Because the stories need to endure, right? So if you love it, there's a reason why you love it. But also considering, going back to what we talked about, what was going on in the Latin school, what Martin Luther and Melanchthon were, the way they decided what would go into their, what would define their curriculum was, one, is it enduring? Does it reflect what we believe, teach, and confess? Does it encourage our students to be virtuous? All of those things. So remember those things that I've appreciated what the Memorial Press has chosen. So that has helped us. English grammar. Okay, so we grappled with this. In English grammar, I've used a lot of Shirley. How many of you use Shirley? Okay, so we use Shirley at Our Savior. We've done for a long time. And we're very intentional about making sure that it is consistent from grade level to grade level, to make sure that they're following through so that they really have the grammar down of what makes up a sentence. I've also used the Hake grammar program. Is anyone familiar with Hake? Look at that. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Hake, Hake is the same writer, or like the wife of the writer of Saxon Mac. So it's the same philosophy, a spiral philosophy going into English grammar. Okay, but this is the thing, well, because we expect that our scholars are getting a great Latin grammar foundation all the way through, because we're very intentional about that by the time they get to 7th and 8th grade, we do not continue teaching English grammar. I think a lot of you other schools have also adopted that philosophy, where you continue on and allow Latin to do the heavy lifting on that one. Okay? So I mentioned we have used Memorial Press Latins, their tool and resource. We've used Classical Academic Press. I had one principal say to me that she had attended a CCLE and the person said, it doesn't matter what you use, just choose something and stick with it. So there is something to be said for, one, consistency, sticking with the same sort of program, because what happens is those children, it sets it up in their brains. Feels natural to them, and then moving on to the next book feels very natural, not all of a sudden I'm going to change and switch something out. So take that for what makes sense in your world. Mathematics. Okay, so this was a tricky one, right? So we have been using, I've used Saxon all the way back in that wonderful little school in Fort Wayne, and when I homeschooled, I used Saxon Math. Used it at St. Paul. Used it at Our Savior, but of course there's an end of life date on Saxon. If you're aware of that, how am I doing? Are you aware of that? Yeah. Okay, so the bell is tolling, right? We're getting close. The thing is that if you're homeschooling, most likely, this is what the publisher told me when I reached out to him.
Sorry, can you explain for those of us who don't know?
What an end of life date means?
Yeah.
It means they're not going to publish it any longer.
Not at all.
No. Now here's the tricky thing. This is what, and going back to Shirley and Saxon have both been bought by some of the big publishers. Okay? We should be careful. Should we not? That means that our Saxon books started to say Common Core on the front so that everybody felt good about it, right? But you have to watch, because if you're using that, it did creep in there. But my point is that we need to be responsible for our own curriculum, right? That's why our greatest asset is the teacher in the classroom. One, to be able to deliver it correctly and well. It's your responsibility as administrators to make sure they're trained and professionally developed to do it well and know how to do it. Okay, so we needed to come, we went through a curriculum review, and I talk about this later, but I'll just dive right into it. We do a 5-year curriculum review cycle. So each year, we sit down with our faculty. We go through and review one area that we need to make sure that we are, one, is effective, The tool we're using is an effective tool. Our students are successful. We want to make sure that it certainly reflects what we believe teaching is best. So we went through math. Here's what I would caution you to do though. You can get really bogged down by it. You do the first review, come up with 3 that you're comfortable with, and then take it to the teachers and let them evaluate because they're the ones who have to do it. And they have to buy in. You have to get buy-in from the faculty. It is just a reality because they're the ones who are going to take that and deliver it to your scholars. So get their feedback. We divide up into groupings of K-2, 3 to 5, and 6 to 8. We have them, I lead teachers. In fact, I have one in here today. And they lead that section with those teachers. They meet once a month. They look at that curriculum. They evaluate it, that curriculum tool. I give them a form. They fill it out. Now, how do I get that form? When we started history this last year, we start off with a nominal exercise. I don't know about you, but being a new principal in this new school, they were very nervous about talking. When I would ask them questions, silence, right? I don't know, they were a little afraid of Kate. I can't even imagine, but I couldn't get them to talk. A nominal exercise requires everyone to give input. So you go around the room, you have them say one thing about what is the most important thing that needs to happen, say in your, that what do you want history curriculum, what tool do you want, what do you want it to look like? So we got things like, it needs to have a Lutheran perspective, yay, fantastic. It needs to be comprehensive, it needs to be based on timeline. It needs, so they came up with those things. Then we went back around, did it again. Then we went through and removed or connected things that people said, and we narrowed it down to 6 different important elements that these teachers said, this is what I would buy into if it kind of had all 6 of these things. And now I've got the start buy-in from our faculty. So, when we did history, because I'll come back to science, mathematics, I should tell you what we chose. We chose Matthew C. Matthew C is a mastery program. It's a big shift. If you're going from Saxon, you're going to need to be ready to talk to parents about the difference between spiral and mastery-based. But I love mastery-based because we're all about building that foundation. It will feel, for parents, they will feel like it's very slow in the early years because it'll focus mainly on addition, and then it goes to subtraction. And here in Saxon, they were churning out all kinds of things, right, early on. But they want to make sure that it's solidified. And I'm talking about in K-2, before they get to 3rd grade, I need them to master all of these concepts, not just in math, but everywhere. I'm building a foundation, not really, but that's what we're doing. So we chose Matthew C. We looked at Singapore, but Matthew C is going pretty well. So if you want to talk to me at the end of this year, again, that'll have given us 2 years with it. So I'd be happy to talk to you about our experience. Okay, so history, when we went through that, we made sure that the timeline was what those dates were what we felt were important, took it to the board, we decided no changes, and then we ended up with Mystery of History as our tool, right, for kindergarten through 5th, correct? Or what's it called? Mystery of History. But please make sure you understand that we're using that. Again, I talked to you about using it as a content tool. They're practicing reading in that 3 to 5, and they're being read to in the younger years. Kindergarten and first grade. Kindergarten is focusing on geography, because history and geography I lumped together in this, so my apologies. We are all about geography. Kindergarten focuses on a continent and stories from the continent. In kindergarten and first grade, story-based is where I would recommend, because at this stage, stories are what are going to stick with your children, over focusing on time, because at this point, they're still trying to understand. I mean, I remember, forgive me, this is gonna date me, but like I would say like, oh, it's one Barney show. Like that's all they could get, like in terms of time, and didn't quite grasp what time means at that point. But the timeline is prevalent. It's just, so in first grade, then they break up the timeline into 4 sections, all stories from the ancients, and moving on to Middle Ages, Industrial Age, and then the modern age, and then focusing on maps in each of those sections. So the ancient world maps, moving on to Europe, Asia, right? Because you're in the Middle Ages. Are you with me? Are you following? So that's then applied in second grade. Second grade starts off only focusing on the ancient world. Moving on then to Middle Ages in third grade. We do a living wax museum that year. Fourth grade, they are then going into, they take the other third quarter of the timeline, so from Christ, and then halfway, and then fifth grade, the rest, and then 6th, 7th, 8th grade goes through it all over again. Okay, music. Hymns and liturgy. Hymns and liturgy. Hymns and liturgy, get this into their hearts. Sing it all the time. In the early years, start with the grammar of music and continue to build and work on singing. I recommend, if you can get a violin program, start it early as 4, even if you've got 3-year-olds, and build that up. SQS, you're going to have to come back tomorrow for the Morrisseys, and they'll tell you all about our SQS. That's our grammar program that front loads all of that grammar, and then that is a foundational tool that we use in our classroom. Okay, I already talked about using a 5-year cycle, so choosing what you're going to evaluate every year to make sure that what you're doing is effective. And again, I already talked about involving your faculty. I want to end with this quote, because I've got to check the box, right? So, for Korchak. Inspiration for the model will be found in the past. This is what Lutherans have always done. It is an intrinsic characteristic of the Lutheran Church. So, ultimately, I'm not going to tell you one tool is better than another at this moment. I'm going to tell you we don't have everything out there right now that we just have at our fingertips. But you have your teachers, and your teachers are delivering that curriculum. Most importantly, decide based on what we believe teaching them best, what's important to give to your students and your scholars. Have it written down, and then make sure that the teachers are teaching that. Any questions?
Can you cover science?
I didn't touch on science today. So science, again, is tricky, but what we do is we focus on each of the quadrivium, right? And we're going to also focus on the natural sciences. So by the time we get to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, you're hitting biology, chemistry, physical science, you know, the big disciplines. In the lower grades, we like to do a 3-year cycle. So we're giving them the grammar of those science. So we're looking at what we're doing in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And we've also given the teachers the Memoria Press Science. It's a fine tool. I think taking a Linnaean approach is very helpful. And Linnaeus is the guy who did a lot of pictures and drawings. And if you're and then classified the animals and plants and so forth, because what we were having is one group over here would name something, and then another group would have a different name for it, and so that he created that, and then you could have actual conversation and dialogue about those particular things in the world. So focusing on nature, biology, anatomy, astronomy in those early years, giving them those foundations, giving them an experience of the world around them, get them outside. I mean, we're very blessed. We've got 60+ acres that they can just get out there, and you'll have to come down. Come on down. I'll show you. But and I know St. Paul Hamill does an outdoor education day, so they go out and they get a chance to draw in a nature sketchbook, and then they can practice writing the names of the items, even have them write them in Latin and so forth. So pretty. Okay. Yes.
Yes, so 2 questions. When you said math, you see mathematics. I don't know. The C, is it C?
Oh, it's S-E-E, math, and then the letter U, S-E-E, and it's through Demi Learning.
Okay.
D-E-M-M-E. Yeah.
I just have a question for those. I mean, it seemed like that was a surprise for them, a lot of people about Saxon. We had trouble getting anything this year, so what we did was we super bought last year and are just kind of now trying to find pieces. Are people still able to find it? Because I wasn't able to find much this year. But
Okay, and I
got
kind
it on eBay. But
yeah, I just went right over that. Okay, so what the publisher said, I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent a little bit. The publisher told me that most likely someone will buy it for homeschoolers. Someone will buy it, you can buy the homeschool set. What I was cautioning you is that it's being influenced by the big publishers. And we, as Lutherans, need to be very cautious about it.
With an eye toward the future for math, think about classical conversations, which is a positive name or a bad name, depending on who you talk to. But they are developing, and it's rolling out now, but it's new,
Yes.
a classical math curriculum that incorporates art, beautiful words, and math all together that will be K to 12. That is a massive thing to develop. So they're rolling out, as I understand it, a year that begins this fall. They're, again, plans could change because I'm not in charge of that. I used to work for them. If you have questions, I can talk to you about it. A second year, both of those go well, then they'll expand out because it was something like 40,000 math pieces, to create, right, across that time frame. And others maybe even have more information, but it's something to consider. If they sell it outside, which I've heard that they are, but again, that could change. But keep an eye on it. It is very, very classical.
So I appreciate you bringing that up. The way I entered classical was classical conversations. They did a wonderful job training. I was their stateless practicing speaker, and I was a tutor trainer and tutor for them. But thanks be to God, there was a classical Lutheran school, and I get to be here today. So I sent some of our teachers to classical conversations for their parent practicum this year. Previously, they did an awesome job, 3 days of teaching grammar, logic, rhetoric, just being really straightforward. It's a great tool. Unfortunately, this year, they just were really pushing their new math. Not that I should say unfortunately, but we're just not in the market right now. And so certainly look to that. I just caution you, as I do for all of these, when I mentioned Memorial Press and Classical Academic Press, they aren't Lutheran. We're the Lutherans in the classroom, and we're the ones that need to deliver it. And the dream is that we move away from all of those and we write our own. Your teachers, they will deliver the curriculum that your school says this is what our children need to know. Yes, ma'am?
I just wanted to follow up and encourage you, if you're interested in the math part, to go to Mrs. Cheryl Jordan's presentation tomorrow morning, because she might have some information about that curriculum, but she also comes, like, it's all about math in class.
Yeah, excellent.
So I would just, yeah, great, a little plug for her, because she knows about this curriculum, she knows about it.
Okay, I'm at that time, but please, I'd be happy to talk to any of you after, and I know we need to get to Beth Rosie. My friends, please, do not hesitate, please call me. I would love to help you and support you in what you're doing and encourage you. But thanks be to God for you for being here today, and I pray that this was helpful. But if there's any time I can be of service, please don't hesitate. Give me a call.